Captain Riley stood perfectly still in the general's office, her Barrett M82A1 rifle strapped across her back. The weapon weighed almost 30 pounds, but she barely felt it anymore. She had carried it through deserts, mountains, and training grounds for the past 3 years. It had become part of her. General Thompson didn't look up from his desk. He kept shuffling papers, signing documents, doing anything but acknowledging the soldier standing at attention in front of him. Finally, after what felt like forever, he spoke. "Captain, I'm moving you to logistics, effective immediately." Riley felt her stomach drop, but her face remained neutral. Years of military discipline kept her expression blank. "Sir, may I ask why?" The general finally looked at her, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Sniper operations require a certain physical profile. The Barrett 50 caliber isn't a weapon for everyone. I need soldiers who can handle the demands of extended operations in hostile territory." What he didn't say spoke louder than his words. Riley had outscored every single sniper in the battalion for 3 straight years. Her accuracy ratings were the highest in the entire brigade. She could field strip and reassemble the Barrett blindfolded in under 2 minutes. She had memorized ballistic charts that other soldiers needed computers to calculate. None of it mattered to the general. He saw her and made up his mind before she ever pulled a trigger. "Sir, my performance reviews, I've made my decision, Captain. You're dismissed." Riley saluted sharply, turned on her heel, and walked out. Through the office windows, she could see other members of the sniper unit watching. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. A few others smirked like they had won something. Only Sergeant Brooks, a veteran with 15 years of service, met her eyes and shook his head slowly. The walk back to the barracks felt longer than usual. Other soldiers passed her in the hallway, and she wondered if they had already heard. News traveled fast on a military base. By dinner time, everyone would know that the general had pulled her from sniper operations. That evening, Riley sat alone in the armory. The room smelled like gun oil and metal, familiar scents that usually brought her comfort. She had requested permission to clean her Barrett one last time before turning it in to supply. The weapon gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she worked methodically through each component. This rifle had never let her down. She remembered the first time she fired it, how the massive recoil had surprised her even though she had prepared for it. The Barrett 50 caliber wasn't like other rifles. Each shot felt like controlled thunder. The weapon could punch through concrete walls, disable vehicles, and engage targets at distances that seemed impossible. She had spent countless hours learning its secrets. How temperature affected the bullet's trajectory, how wind at different altitudes could push a round off course, how the Earth's rotation actually mattered when shooting at extreme distances. Most soldiers learned enough to pass their qualifications. Riley had studied until she could feel the right shot in her bones. Her phone buzzed. A text message from Colonel Martinez, her former instructor who had retired 6 months ago. "Heard what happened. Remember what I taught you. Let your shots do the talking." "Your moment will come," Riley smiled slightly. Colonel Martinez had been the only senior officer who never doubted her abilities. She had been a sniper for 20 years before taking a teaching position. On Riley's first day of training, Martinez had pulled her aside. "You're going to face resistance," she had said bluntly. "Some of it will be obvious. Most of it will be subtle. They'll question every shot you make and forget every shot you nail. You'll have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. So here's what you do. You become so damn good that they can't ignore you." Riley had taken those words seriously. She trained longer than anyone else. When other soldiers went to the gym, she went to the range. When they studied for an hour, she studied for 3. She documented every shot, every condition, every variable. Her data book was 3 inches thick, filled with calculations and observations that most snipers never bothered tracking. And now she was being assigned to count supply crates. Sergeant Brooks found her still sitting in the armory an hour later. He knocked on the door frame even though it was open. "Mind if I come in?" Riley nodded and he pulled up a chair. Brooks was old-school military, the kind of soldier who had earned respect through decades of solid performance. When he spoke, people listened. "That was wrong, what happened today," he said simply. "You're the best shot in this unit. Hell, you're probably the best shot I've seen in 20 years. The general knows it too." "That's what makes it worse, and then why?" Riley asked. The question came out more tired than angry. Brooks sighed. Fear, mostly. Fear of change. Fear of admitting he was wrong. The general came up in a different era. He's got ideas about how things should be and he can't let them go, even when reality is staring him in the face. So what do I do? You wait, Brooks said. And you stay sharp. Because eventually they're going to need you. Something will come up that requires the best, not just the most convenient. When that happens, you need to be ready. Riley looked down at the Barrett, now completely cleaned and reassembled. What if they never need me? They will, Brooks said with certainty. War doesn't care about politics or prejudice. When lives are on the line, competence is all that matters. The general will figure that out. Question is whether you'll be ready when he does. After Brooks left, Riley sat alone for a while longer. She thought about quitting, about requesting a transfer to another unit or even leaving the military entirely. She had plenty of skills that could translate to civilian life. Private security firms were always looking for trained marksmen, but that felt like giving up. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to walk away now. Colonel Martinez's words echoed in her mind. Your moment will come. Riley stood up and carefully placed the Barrett back in its case. Tomorrow she would turn it in to supply and report to logistics. She would inventory equipment and process supply requests and do whatever job they gave her without complaint. But she wouldn't stop training. The base had a rifle range that was open to all soldiers during off-duty hours. She could check out a standard rifle and keep her skills sharp. More importantly, she could keep studying, keep learning, keep preparing for whatever came next. Because Brooks was right. Eventually they would need the best. And when that moment came, she would be ready to take the shot. As she locked the armory and headed back to her quarters, Riley made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let doubt creep in. She wouldn't let the general's dismissal define her capabilities. She had earned her place through skill and dedication, and no amount of prejudice could take that away. The Barrett .50 caliber would wait in storage, but the knowledge, the training, the thousands of hours of practice, those stayed with her. And when the moment came, when they needed someone who could make the impossible shot, she would remind them exactly what they had tried to dismiss. 3 years of excellence couldn't be erased by one man's closed mind. Riley just needed to be patient. Her opportunity would come. And when it did, she wouldn't miss. 3 weeks of counting supplies had nearly driven Riley insane. Every morning she reported to the logistics warehouse, checked inventory lists, and processed equipment requests. It was important work, sure. Soldiers needed ammunition, food, medical supplies, and gear. But it wasn't what she had trained for. She kept up her skills anyway. Every evening after her shift, she headed to the rifle range. She couldn't check out the Barrett anymore, but she practiced with standard rifles, working on breathing techniques and trigger control. Other soldiers would see her there alone on the range as the sun set, still working long after everyone else had gone to dinner. On a Tuesday morning, everything changed. Riley was in the warehouse, clipboard in hand, counting boxes of MREs when the alarm siren started wailing. It was the alert for a tactical situation. All personnel to report to their stations immediately. She dropped the clipboard and ran. The Tactical Operations Center was packed when she arrived. Soldiers crowded around computer screens and maps, everyone talking at once. Riley found Sergeant Brooks near the back. What's happening? She asked quietly. Brooks kept his voice low. Intelligence located Ahmed Rashid. He's meeting with his cell leaders at a compound near the border. Riley's eyes widened. Ahmed Rashid was one of the most wanted terrorist commanders in the region. He had planned attacks that killed dozens of coalition soldiers and hundreds of civilians. Finding him was nearly impossible. He moved constantly, never staying in one place more than a few hours. Are we sending a strike team? She asked. That's the problem, Brooks said, nodding toward the front of the room where General Thompson stood with his senior officers, studying a large topographical map. Riley moved closer, careful not to draw attention to herself. She could hear the general's conversation. The compound is here, an intelligence officer said, pointing to the map, but the only viable observation point is this ridge. Range is 3,200 meters, someone whistled low. 3,200 meters was over 2 miles. It was at the absolute edge of what was theoretically possible with a Barrett .50 caliber. What about air support? The general asked. Drone strike, precision missiles. The intelligence officer shook his head. Weather's turning, sir. Heavy cloud cover moving in within 90 minutes. No aircraft can operate in those conditions, and the storm system will last at least 3 days. By then, Rashid will be gone. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. This was likely their only shot at Rashid for months, maybe years. Major Peterson, the senior sniper instructor, was studying the calculations on a laptop. Sir, even with the M107, this is pushing beyond proven capability. I've engaged targets successfully at 2,800 meters in ideal conditions. But this terrain, these wind patterns, the altitude changes. He paused. Sir, I'd estimate maybe a 20% success rate. And if we miss, we alert their security. They'll evacuate and we'll never get another chance. General Thompson's jaw clenched. Riley could see the conflict on his face. Letting Rashid escape meant more attacks, more casualties. But authorizing a low-probability shot could mean losing their only opportunity. What are our other options? The general asked. We don't have any, sir. The intelligence officer said quietly. It's this or nothing. The room stayed silent. Riley's mind was already working through the calculations. 3,200 meters. Bullet drop would be massive, over 100 feet. Wind, deflection, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the earth would affect the shot. But she had trained for this exact scenario. Those long nights on the range, the endless hours studying ballistics, the data book filled with notes, it all came down to shots like this. Sergeant Brooks cleared his throat. Sir, if I may. The general turned, looking irritated at the interruption. What is it, Sergeant? Captain Riley has been training specifically for extreme range engagement. Her documented performance includes consistent hits at 3,000 meters. Several officers turned to look at Riley, who felt her face flush. Major Peterson frowned. Range performance isn't combat, Sergeant. Different pressure, different variables. I understand that, sir, Brooks said calmly. But right now, we need someone who can make a 3,200-meter shot. Captain Riley has been preparing for exactly this kind of scenario for 3 years. The general's expression hardened. Riley could see him struggling with the decision. He had dismissed her 3 weeks ago, told her she wasn't suited for sniper operations. Now his own senior sniper was telling him the shot was probably impossible, and a sergeant was suggesting he send the woman he had reassigned to logistics. Where is Captain Riley? The general asked, his voice tight. Here, sir, Riley said, stepping forward. General Thompson looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, weighing his options, fighting against his own pride. Finally, he gestured to the map. Captain, this is the target compound. This is the only observation point. Range is 3,247 meters to be exact. The target will be in the compound at dawn. We have approximately 6 hours to get into position. He paused. Can you make this shot? Riley stepped up to the map and studied it carefully. The valley system was complex, with multiple ridge lines that would create unpredictable wind patterns. The angle was steep, shooting downward into the target area. Temperature would be cold at that altitude, affecting the bullet's velocity. Humidity looked high based on the weather data displayed on the screen. Every variable was running through her mind automatically, years of training taking over. She pulled up the ballistic data on the computer, checking the specific ammunition they had available. M33 ball rounds, 6 and 61 grains. She would need to compensate for over 1,400 inches of bullet drop. The wind would push the round off course by several feet. The shot would take approximately 7 seconds from trigger pull to impact. It was at the absolute edge of possible, maybe even beyond it. One small miscalculation and she would miss. One unexpected wind gust and the bullet would drift off target. The margin for error was essentially zero, but she had prepared for this her entire career. I can make this shot, sir, Riley said, meeting the general's eyes. But I need complete control once I'm in position. No one else calling the wind or making adjustments. I know the Barrett, I know the ballistics, and I know what's possible. The general studied her face, looking for doubt or hesitation. He wouldn't find any. Riley had never been more certain of anything in her life. You understand what's at stake? The general asked. If you miss, we lose Rashid. We lose the element of surprise. We potentially compromise future operations. I understand, sir. And you're confident you can engage a target at 3,200 meters in field conditions? Yes, sir. The general looked at Major Peterson. Get her whatever she needs. Full equipment loadout. Best ammunition we have, experienced spotter. He turned back to Riley. You have 6 hours to get into position. The target will be exposed at dawn. You'll have one shot, Captain. Make it count. Yes, sir, Riley said, trying to keep the adrenaline out of her voice. The room erupted into activity as soldiers began preparing for the mission. Riley was immediately surrounded by support staff running through equipment checklists. Someone handed her a tablet with weather forecasts and wind predictions. Another soldier brought detailed photographs of the target, Brooks appeared at her elbow. Your spotter will be Corporal Williams. He's solid, won't panic under pressure. Riley nodded, her mind already shifting into mission mode. She had 6 hours to prepare for the most important shot of her career. There would be time later to think about what it meant that the general had chosen her. Right now, she needed to focus. As she headed to the armory to retrieve her Barrett, Major Peterson stopped her. Captain, I meant what I said earlier. This shot is at the extreme edge of possible. Don't let pressure push you into taking a shot that isn't there. Riley appreciated the concern, but she had already committed. I'll take the shot that's possible, sir. And I'll make it. Peterson studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good luck, Captain. Riley picked up her pace. The clock was ticking, and she had a lot of preparation ahead of her. But for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt like herself again. The Barrett .50 caliber was waiting for her in the armory. It was time to get to work. The helicopter dropped them 3 kilometers from the observation point. Any closer and the noise would alert enemy security. Riley and Corporal Williams would have to hike the rest of the way in darkness, carrying over 100 pounds of equipment between them. Williams was a good choice for a spotter. He was 24 years old but had the calm demeanor of someone much older. As they moved through the rocky terrain, he kept pace without complaint, his breathing steady despite the altitude and the weight of his gear. Riley had the Barrett strapped across her back. Even after carrying it for years, she never took its weight for granted. Almost 30 pounds of precision engineering that could send a bullet accurately across distances that seemed impossible. Every step had to be careful. One wrong move on the loose rocks could trigger a small avalanche that would echo across the valley. How long have you been shooting the .50 caliber, ma'am? Williams asked quietly as they climbed. 3 years officially, Riley replied, testing her footing before committing her weight. But I've been studying long-range ballistics since I joined the military. Some people collect coins or stamps. I collect data on how bullets behave. Williams chuckled softly. I looked at your training records before we left, ma'am. That 2,900-meter shot you made last year at the range. That wasn't luck, was it? Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, Riley said. But I won't lie to you, Williams. This shot tomorrow is different. Range conditions are controlled. Out here, wind can shift without warning. Temperature changes. Humidity fluctuates. We're at the absolute limit of what this rifle can do. But you can make it. Riley paused to check her compass and GPS. I can make it if the conditions allow it. That's what people don't understand about extreme long-range shooting. It's not just about pulling the trigger. It's about reading the environment, understanding the variables, and knowing when the shot is possible. Sometimes the hardest thing a sniper does is deciding not to shoot. They continued climbing in silence. The terrain grew steeper as they approached the observation point. Riley's legs burned from the effort, but she kept her breathing controlled. Physical fitness was part of the job. You couldn't make a precise shot if you were gasping for air. They reached the position 90 minutes before dawn. It was exactly where intelligence had indicated, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley below. Riley immediately dropped her pack and began setting up. Every movement was practiced, efficient. She had done this setup hundreds of times in training. The Barrett came out first. She extended the bipod legs, adjusted them for the angle, and positioned the rifle on a stable platform of rocks and sandbags. The position wasn't comfortable, but comfort didn't matter. Stability mattered. The rifle couldn't move even a fraction of an inch. Williams set up his spotting scope next to her, positioning it at the same angle. His job was to watch for the bullet's impact, read wind conditions, and confirm the target. But the actual shot decision would be Riley's alone. General Thompson had given her full autonomy, which meant the responsibility was entirely on her shoulders. Range confirmed at 3,247 meters, Williams said, checking his laser rangefinder against the GPS data. Temperature is 42 degrees. Humidity 68%. Barometric pressure is falling slightly. That storm system is moving in faster than predicted. Riley pulled out her data book, the worn notebook that contained years of accumulated knowledge. She began working through the calculations, checking every variable twice. At this range, even tiny errors would compound into massive misses. Bullet drop would be approximately 1,400 inches. Over 100 feet. She would be aiming at a spot in the sky that seemed nowhere near the actual target, trusting physics and mathematics to bring the bullet down to where it needed to be. Wind was the biggest unknown. The valley below had its own weather patterns. Wind could be moving one direction at their elevation and completely differently down where the target was. She studied the vegetation in the valley through her scope, watching how different plants moved at different altitudes. Wind looks variable, Williams observed. 4 to 7 miles per hour, shifting between southeast and east-southeast. Riley nodded, making notes in her data book. The wind would push the bullet off course by approximately 2 feet, maybe more. But that calculation assumed steady wind. If it gusted at the wrong moment during the 7 seconds the bullet was in flight, the shot could miss by several feet. She loaded a single M33 ball round into the Barrett's chamber. The metallic click sounded loud in the pre-dawn quiet. This bullet would take 7 seconds to reach the target. 7 seconds where everything had to go right. 7 seconds where she couldn't control anything except the initial trajectory. The sky began to lighten slowly. Riley settled into her shooting position, her body molded to the terrain. She had learned to become part of the ground, to eliminate any unnecessary movement. Her breathing slowed naturally, falling into the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Williams scanned the target compound through his spotting scope. Movement in the courtyard. Looks like security personnel doing a sweep. Riley found the compound in her own scope. At 3,200 meters, it looked impossibly far away. The building was barely more than a rectangular shape. People were tiny dots that moved across the courtyard. She could see the layout match the intelligence photos. Stone walls, a central courtyard, a main building on the southern side. "How many shots have you made at this distance?" Williams asked quietly. "In training? Maybe 20 successful hits out of 30 attempts," Riley said honestly. "But training is different. Controlled conditions. No pressure. No consequences for missing. What's different about today?" Riley thought about that. Everything. The stakes. The terrain. The fact that I only get one shot. But also, I'm more prepared than I've ever been. I've been studying for this moment my entire career, even when I didn't know it. Williams was quiet for a moment. "The guys in the unit, they talk about you, ma'am. Some of them were surprised when you got pulled from sniper ops, said you were the best shot they'd seen." "Not everyone thought that," Riley said. "No," Williams agreed, "but the ones who matter did. The ones who actually understand what it takes." The sky continued to brighten. The compound below began to come into focus more clearly. Riley could see more details now. The texture of the stone walls, the pattern of tiles in the courtyard, the shadows cast by the building. Her heart rate had slowed to its resting pace. This was a skill she had developed over years, the ability to stay calm when everything was on the line. Adrenaline was the enemy of precision. She had learned to control it, to channel the energy without letting it disrupt her focus. "Multiple individuals entering the courtyard," Williams reported. "Count is 4, no 5 people. Target is not yet visible." Riley tracked the movement through her scope. The people were still just shapes, dark figures against lighter stone. At this distance, individual features were impossible to see. She was aiming at a human being, but through the scope he would be little more than a silhouette. "Wind is shifting," Williams said, now reading 6 to 8 miles per hour, coming more from the east. Riley adjusted her aim point slightly, compensating for the increased drift. 3 feet now instead of 2. The numbers ran through her head automatically, muscle memory combining with mathematics. Target emerging from the building. Williams' voice had tension in it now. Southeast corner. White clothing, gray vest matching the description. Riley found him in her scope. After months of hunting this man, after all the attacks he had planned, after all the lives he had taken, he was just a small figure in her crosshairs. At 3,200 meters, Ahmed Rashid looked like any other person in the courtyard. But Riley knew what he represented. She knew the intelligence reports, the casualty lists, the threat assessments. This one shot could save dozens, maybe hundreds of lives. "He's moving toward the center of the courtyard," Williams said. "You'll have maybe 60 seconds before he reaches the building entrance." Riley's finger moved to the trigger. Not pulling yet, just making contact. The Barrett was perfectly stable now, her body position locked in. She had compensated for every variable she could measure. The rest was timing and execution. Then the wind shifted again. "Wind change," Williams said urgently. "Now 8 to 10 miles per hour, gusting from due east." Riley's mind recalculated instantly. More drift, at least another foot. But gusting meant unpredictable. If the wind surged during the bullet's flight, It could push the round several feet off target. If it died down, her compensation would be too much. 45 seconds, ma'am. He's approaching the doorway. This was the moment every sniper trained for but hoped to avoid. The shot was possible but not certain. The conditions were acceptable but not ideal. The stakes were as high as they could be. Riley watched the vegetation in the valley, feeling the wind on her face, listening to the subtle sounds that told her how air was moving through the terrain. Years of experience condensed into pure instinct. The shot was there. She could feel it. 30 seconds, ma'am. Riley took a breath, let half of it out, and found the perfect stillness between heartbeats. Her finger began its smooth press against the trigger. No jerking, no flinching, just steady pressure until the breo. The Barrett roared like thunder. The recoil slammed into Riley's shoulder with familiar force, but years of training had taught her body how to absorb it. She didn't fight the rifle. She rode the recoil, maintaining her position, keeping her eye to the scope. Smoke from the muzzle blast obscured her view for a split second before the wind cleared it away. The sound echoed across the valley, bouncing off ridgelines and rock faces. Down in the compound, people would hear it, but they wouldn't immediately know where it came from. At 3,200 meters, the sound took nearly 10 seconds to reach them, and the valley's acoustics would make it seem like it came from everywhere at once. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the bullet. 661 grains of copper-jacketed lead traveling at 2,800 feet per second. In less than a second, the bullet would go supersonic, creating a crack that would announce its presence, but it would also start to drop, pulled down by gravity while simultaneously being pushed sideways by wind. 7 seconds to impact, Williams counted, his eye pressed to the spotting scope. His voice was steady, professional, but Riley could hear the tension underneath. 6, 5. Riley couldn't see the bullet. There was no tracer, no visible arc across the sky. She had aimed at a point that seemed to be nowhere near the target, trusting years of study and calculation. The bullet was following a trajectory she had plotted in her mind, rising slightly from the muzzle blast, then beginning its long, curved descent toward the valley below. 4 and 3. 3,200 meters. Over 2 miles. The bullet had already traveled further than most rifle shots ever go. It was flying over terrain features, over rocks and vegetation, riding air currents that Riley had tried to predict but couldn't completely control. 2, 1. Through his spotting scope, Williams saw it happen. The bullet arrived in the courtyard traveling at just under the speed of sound. Most of its initial velocity bled away by air resistance over the extreme distance. But 661 grains of lead moving at subsonic speed still carried devastating energy. The man in the white clothing and gray vest collapsed instantly. His bodyguards reacted a second later, diving for cover, their weapons coming up as they scanned the ridgelines. But they were looking in the wrong direction, confused by the echoing gunshot that seemed to come from everywhere. "Hit," Williams said, his voice cracking slightly with awe. "Direct hit. Target is down." "Repeat, target is down." Riley let out a long, controlled breath. She had been holding herself in perfect stillness, not allowing herself to move or react until the shot was confirmed. Now the tension released all at once, and she felt almost dizzy with relief. "Confirmed?" she asked, needing to hear it again. "Confirmed, ma'am. Clean hit, center mass. Target is not moving. Security personnel are in defensive positions, but they can't locate our position." Riley reached for her radio, her hands surprisingly steady. "Actual, this is Sierra 7. Mission complete. Target neutralized. Requesting extraction." There was a pause. Then General Thompson's voice came through, stripped of its usual commanding tone. He sounded almost uncertain, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Sierra 7, confirm your last transmission. You're saying the target is neutralized?" "Affirmative, actual. Single shot. Confirmed hit at 3,247 meters. Target is down." The pause was longer this time. Riley could imagine the scene in the Tactical Operations Center. Officers staring at monitors trying to process what had just happened. A shot that should have been nearly impossible, made successfully on the first attempt under field conditions. "Outstanding work, Sierra 7, the general finally said. "Extraction helicopter inbound. E to 30 minutes. Stay in position until pickup arrives." "Roger that, actual." Riley safeguarded her weapon, making the Barrett secure while Williams continued to monitor the compound below. The security personnel were evacuating now, carrying their fallen commander's body and retreating from the exposed courtyard. They still hadn't figured out where the shot came from. That was incredible, ma'am, Williams said quietly. I've been spotting for snipers for 3 years. I've never seen anything like that. It was the shot that was there, Riley said simply. Right conditions, right moment. Everything aligned. But even as she said it, she knew it was more than that. Yes, the conditions had been acceptable. Yes, the moment had been right. But the shot required everything she had learned over years of dedicated practice. The calculations, the instinct, the ability to read wind from watching plants move 2 miles away, the discipline to hold steady when every nerve wanted to rush, the confidence to trust her training even when the stakes were impossibly high. Williams packed up his spotting scope while Riley carefully secured the Barrett. They would wait for extraction, then make the helicopter ride back to base. And then, what? Would the general reinstate her to sniper operations? Would he acknowledge that his initial assessment had been wrong? Riley realized she didn't know, but for the first time in 3 weeks she didn't feel the gnawing doubt that had been eating at her. She had proven something today, not to anyone else but to herself. When the impossible shot was needed, she had been ready. All those nights on the range, all those hours studying ballistics, all that preparation had led to this single moment. Helicopter inbound, Williams said, checking his radio. 5 minutes out. Riley looked out across the valley one last time. Dawn had fully broken now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere down there, a terrorist commander who had killed dozens of people would never hurt anyone else. The mission was complete. The helicopter appeared over the ridgeline right on time, the pilot expertly navigating the mountain terrain. As it settled on the small landing zone, Riley and Williams gathered their gear and moved quickly to board. General Thompson was waiting at the base when they landed. Riley saw him standing on the tarmac, along with what looked like most of the senior staff. As the helicopter's rotors wound down, she stepped out, the Barrett still strapped across her back. The general approached and extended his hand. Riley shook it, meeting his eyes directly. "Captain Riley," he said, and his voice was different now, not the dismissive tone from 3 weeks ago. "That was one of the most remarkable pieces of marksmanship I've witnessed in 30 years of military service." "Thank you, sir," Riley said, keeping her response professional. The general looked uncomfortable, like he was struggling with what to say next. Several other officers had gathered around, waiting to see how this would play out. Finally, he spoke again. "I need to say something, and I need to say it in front of witnesses. 3 weeks ago, I made a decision based on preconceptions rather than performance. I let my assumptions override documented evidence and proven capability. That was a failure of leadership on my part, and I apologize." Riley hadn't expected that. A public apology from a general was rare, almost unheard of. She could see the cost it took him to say those words. "What you accomplished today proves what I should have recognized all along," the general continued. "Effective immediately, you're reinstated to sniper operations with a promotion to major. Additionally, I'm assigning you to lead the advanced marksmanship training program. We need more soldiers who can perform at your level." "Thank you, sir," Riley said. The promotion felt validating, but there was also a hollow quality to it. She had needed to make an impossible shot under combat conditions just to prove what her training records had already shown. "The shot has been verified by 3 independent sources," Major Peterson said, stepping forward with a tablet. 3,247 meters. Confirmed hit with compensation for approximately 1,400 inches of bullet drop and 26 inches of wind deflection. It's the longest confirmed combat engagement in this battalion's history, possibly in the entire region's history. Other soldiers were gathering now, word spreading through the base. Riley saw Sergeant Brooks in the crowd, grinning with obvious pride. She saw some of the other snipers, their expressions mixed, some impressed, some envious, a few still skeptical. But she also saw something else. 3 female soldiers she didn't recognize standing together near the back of the crowd. They were watching her with expressions of hope and possibility, like they had just witnessed a barrier break that they hadn't been sure could be broken. That evening, after the debriefings and the paperwork and the endless questions from officers wanting to understand how she made the shot, Riley found herself back in the armory. The Barrett was secured in its case, cleaned and ready for the next mission. Sergeant Brooks found her there, just like he had 3 weeks ago. "Quite a day," he said, pulling up a chair. "Quite a day," Riley agreed. "You know what's going to happen now, right?" Brooks asked. "This story is going to spread. Not just through this base, but throughout the military. People are going to study this shot. They're going to analyze every variable, every calculation. It's going to become a teaching moment. I just did my job, Riley said. No, Brooks corrected gently. You did everyone's job perfectly when it mattered most. There's a difference, and whether you like it or not, you've become a symbol. Every woman who wants to be a sniper is going to hear about this. Every commander who thinks certain roles should be limited to cert. The story spread faster than Riley expected. Within 48 hours, soldiers from other units were requesting to meet her. Within a week, she received orders to brief senior military leadership on the technical aspects of the shot. Within 2 weeks, her name was appearing in classified after-action reports that would eventually inform training doctrine across the military. But the most meaningful changes started small. A corporal named Chen approached Riley in the mess hall one evening. She looked nervous, clutching a data book similar to Riley's own. "Ma'am, I'm in the sniper training program," Chen said quietly. "My instructor told me I should talk to you. I'm having trouble with wind reading at extended ranges, and I was wondering if you had any advice." Riley invited her to sit down, and they spent an hour going through techniques. Chen had talent but lacked confidence. She second-guessed her calculations, doubted her instincts. Riley recognized the pattern. It was the same self-doubt that came from constantly being questioned and tested more rigorously than her peers. "Trust your preparation," Riley told her. "You've done the work. You know the ballistics. The hardest part isn't making the calculation. It's believing in your calculation enough to commit to the shot." Chen nodded, making notes. "Did you ever doubt yourself?" "Before the shot?" Riley considered that. Every sniper doubts. The question is whether you let doubt paralyze you, or whether you acknowledge it and move forward anyway. I knew the 3,200-meter shot was at the edge of possible. I knew I might miss, but I also knew I had prepared as thoroughly as anyone could, so I took the shot. Over the following weeks, more soldiers sought her out. Not just women, though there were plenty of those. Male soldiers came too, wanting to understand her approach to extreme-range shooting, her methods for calculating wind, her techniques for maintaining focus under pressure. Riley's new position leading the advanced marksmanship program gave her a platform to teach. She redesigned parts of the curriculum, adding more emphasis on environmental reading and decision-making under uncertainty. She brought guest instructors, including Colonel Martinez, who came out of retirement to teach a week-long seminar. "You're building something good here," Martinez told her after observing one of Riley's classes. "Not just teaching people to shoot, teaching them to think like precision marksmen." The military brass wanted to capitalize on the publicity. They asked Riley to participate in recruitment videos, to speak at ceremonies, to represent the military at public events. She declined most of it. The performance mattered, not the performance of talking about the performance. But she did accept one invitation. A military academy had invited her to speak to their senior class about leadership and excellence under pressure. Standing in front of 200 future officers, Riley chose her words carefully. "People are going to tell you this story is about a 3,200-meter shot," she said. "And technically it is. But really, it's about what happens when you prepare for years without knowing if you'll ever get the opportunity to prove yourself. It's about staying sharp even when people tell you you're not needed. It's about believing in your capabilities even when leadership doesn't." She paused, looking out at the young faces watching her. "Some of you will face barriers in your career. Maybe not the same ones I faced, but barriers nonetheless. Some of those barriers will be legitimate, skills you need to develop, experiences you need to gain. But some will be artificial, based on assumptions rather than evidence. Your job is to know the difference and to keep preparing anyway, because eventually, there will be a moment when your capability matters more than anyone's opinion about your capability." The speech received a standing ovation, but Riley was more interested in the conversations afterward. A dozen cadets approached her with questions, several admitting they had almost quit the academy because they felt they didn't fit the traditional mold of what a soldier should be. "Don't quit because of other people's limitations," Riley told one young cadet who was struggling with whether to pursue combat arms. "Quit if you decide it's not right for you, but don't let someone else's narrow view make that decision for you." Back at her unit, things had shifted in subtle ways. The general still maintained his authoritative command style, but he was more careful now about dismissing capability without evidence. He had instituted new evaluation protocols that focused on performance metrics, rather than subjective assessments. Major Peterson, who had initially doubted the 3,200-meter shot was possible, became one of Riley's strongest advocates. He pulled her aside one day after a training exercise. "I need to tell you something," he said. "When the general first suggested sending you on that mission, my immediate reaction was that it was a mistake. I thought he was making a desperate decision that would fail." "I know," Riley said simply. "I was wrong," Peterson continued. "Not just about that specific situation, but about my entire framework for evaluating capability. I realized I had been using shortcuts, visual assessments, assumptions about physical profiles, unconscious biases. Your shot made me examine all of that. I've changed how I evaluate snipers in my program because of it." "That means a lot, sir," Riley said. And it did. Changing systems required changing the people who ran those systems. The intelligence community confirmed that Ahmed Rashid's elimination had disrupted the terrorist network significantly. 3 planned attacks were prevented because his successor lacked the organizational capability. Dozens of lives saved, maybe hundreds over time, all because of one shot made under nearly impossible conditions. But Riley found herself thinking less about the tactical victory and more about the other effects. The increase in women applying to sniper training programs had jumped by 300%. Combat arms recruiters reported renewed interest from demographics that had previously felt excluded. Training protocols were being rewritten to focus more on measurable performance and less on assumptions. 6 months after the shot, Riley received a letter forwarded through official channels. It was from a high school student in the Midwest who had been researching military careers. "I was told by my guidance counselor that certain military roles weren't realistic for someone like me," the letter read. "But then I read about what you did. I'm not saying I want to be a sniper specifically, but I realized that realistic is just someone's opinion unless there's actual evidence. So I'm applying to the military academy, and I'm going to pursue whatever role I'm best suited for, regardless of what anyone thinks is realistic. Thank you for showing that excellence speaks louder than doubt." Riley kept that letter in her desk drawer. On difficult days when the bureaucracy frustrated her, or when she encountered resistance to the changes she was trying to implement, she would read it again. The 3,200-meter shot itself became a case study in military training programs. Ballistics experts analyzed every variable: the wind patterns that day, the atmospheric conditions, the specific ammunition lot number, the rifle's maintenance history. All of it was documented and studied. Some experts calculated that Riley had compensated for factors that most snipers wouldn't even consider. The Coriolis effect, the slight deflection caused by Earth's rotation, became part of the discussion. At 3,200 meters shooting east, the bullet's path curved slightly to the right. Riley had accounted for it, adjusting her aim by approximately 3 inches to compensate for a factor that was purely theoretical in most shooting scenarios. "How did you even know to account for Coriolis effect?" a ballistics instructor asked her during one of the many technical briefings. "I read a physics paper about it during a long deployment," Riley said. "I was bored, and there was a research library on the base. The paper described how long-range artillery has to compensate for Earth's rotation. I started wondering if it applied to small arms at extreme distances. So I did the calculations and started incorporating it into my practice." That answer summed up her approach. While other soldiers were playing cards or watching movies during downtime, Riley had been reading physics papers and running ballistic calculations. Excellence wasn't a single moment. It was thousands of hours of preparation that happened when no one was watching. General Thompson asked her to brief incoming battalion commanders on integrating diverse capabilities into their units. Standing in front of a room full of senior officers, Riley kept it simple. "Look at performance data, not profiles," she said. "Create evaluation standards that measure capability, then apply those standards equally. When someone meets or exceeds the standard, give them the opportunity. And if someone has been consistently exceeding standards but isn't being given opportunities, ask yourself why, because the answer probably reveals more about your assessment process than about their capability." It wasn't a comfortable message for everyone in the room. Change never was. But Riley had earned the credibility to say it. Years later, when military historians wrote about the evolution of special operations capability, they would point to specific moments that shifted institutional thinking. The 3,200-meter shot would be one of them. Not because it was the longest shot ever made. There would eventually be longer ones. But because it happened at a moment when the military was grappling with questions about capability, opportunity, and how to ident.